Good morning and welcome everybody to our live broadcast on Educator Wellness, yours, mine, our care, Educator Wellness and Self-Care Redesign Tips. My name is Justin DeLeon. I'm joining you from Miami, Florida, and I'm here with my colleague and friend, Michaela McDade, and I'll have her introduce herself too.
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually in Dallas, Texas. It's a little rainy here, but I'm very excited to be here. I am a design principal with Ed Elements, and I have a passion for teacher wellness and retention, and am honored to get to spend some time with you today.
All right, we're going to go ahead and dig in. And just for some context, we'll be sharing some information up front about how you can approach and improve educator wellness in your district, school, or whatever your role or organization is. And then we're going to be opening it up for some Q&A towards the end. So we've introduced ourselves again. I'm Justin, joining you from Miami, Florida. If you could all take a second to introduce yourselves in the chat, we'd love to know who's here, what your role is. If you're joining us from a district or a charter network or an independent school or anything in between, let us know and introduce yourself to the community. So we'll give you a few moments to do that so we can check in and see where everybody is joining us from across the country. And I see we have Emily from Annapolis, Maryland. Good morning, Emily. Thanks for joining. All right, and keep introducing yourselves. We want to create a little bit of community here and make sure people have a chance to connect with one another. And we'll be stopping throughout to ask you to reflect and respond to some of our different prompts and questions throughout. Okay, so a little bit about Education Elements. If you're newer to us, we are a K-12 team. We support districts, schools, and networks across the country, from where I live in Miami, Florida, to as far north and west as Alaska. And you can see that we're supporting schools and districts in many different states across the country. Our work focuses on a number of different challenges, opportunities across schools and systems, including helping schools to redesign and implement blended and personalized learning, supporting strategic planning, developing data cultures and coaching around that to improve teacher quality. And towards the right, you see that we also focus very much on teacher recruitment and retention. And we believe that a significant component of improving teacher retention is understanding and improving educator wellness. So that's exactly why we're here today, to share some information with you and spark some new ideas.
Thank you so much. JDL, I wanted to spend some time kind of getting us a big, wide overview of what we'll be exploring today. So we'll hear a little bit about just the current state of educator wellness. And we have three major objectives that we're going to try to tackle today. So we're going to name some considerations that your organization can take, as well as offer some tips, 3 to be exact, that could help influence your redesign. We're also going to spend some time reflecting on our current systems and practices, because the educator exodus is real, and we want to make sure that we pinpoint opportunities to prioritize wellness and hopefully not just be able to recruit, but retain our best talent. And finally, just as Justin kind of named, building this sense of community. So we'll be sharing practices, barriers, and ideas. And hopefully you'll leave today with some tools that you can use to influence teacher wellness and organizational wellness. So the key takeaways for today is, I would hope that you start to question, how does wellness really look in my organization? What are some of the things that we're doing that are working well? What are some of the areas that we might want to prioritize? So internalizing those current systems is really a huge point for us. The next takeaway is, how can I prioritize it within my organization and make sure that wellness is balanced, and you will be leaving with tools. So where do I start? We want to make sure that you have what you need to move from theory to action. As we ground ourselves in our why today, we want to make sure that we have some commonality among our terms. And I love this graphic because it talks about some information that I got from an ASCD article. The article was called Netflix Isn't Enough, which is crazy because I'm sure everybody is binging something now. But I love these 6 lenses that really help us to think about the entirety of wellness. There are people who like to work out. Some people feel re-energized, rejuvenated, and refilled when they get to journal or create art or being interconnected with nature. The key is in our organizational redesign, we have to take all of those into account so that people can bring their whole selves to the work. Some interesting data that we kind of unearthed was from our partner Xanadu and with Education Elements Pulse Survey. And with this, I love this graphic because it highlighted the 3 concerns of educators. So we're thinking about climate and culture and employee retention, but there are other dynamics that are at play when we're thinking about wellness and how these items impact our ability to be the best we can be. Now, I want to give you a second just to process those quotes that are on the screen. These quotes really help us get an understanding of what people are thinking. And until schools and organizations fully attend to adults' social emotional needs, and especially because they're really parallel to our students' needs, we will continue to need opportunities to feel recharged. And we want to really try to mitigate or at least slow or keep up with the departure that we may be experiencing, or trying to really understand that there are some systemic issues that are causing stress.
All right, thanks, Mika. So we're going to shift gears. We're going to get more into some practical things that each of you can do or consider doing to improve teacher wellness, and more so to educate some of your colleagues. Maybe you're doing a number of the things that we're sharing, but you need a framework or some of the language that Mika's referring to make it more clear and accessible to the people that you support. So our first tip of 3 is to listen to teachers and adjust. And you might be like, Justin, obviously we got to listen to our people. But actually, how often does that happen? How often are you making space to connect with different teachers in your building, listen to them and talk to them specifically about the current state of how they're feeling and what they're experiencing, and doing that with discipline and doing that on an ongoing basis? And what does that look like? So we're going to provide some ways to think about that in just a sec. But before we do that, we wanted to open it back up to the chat and ask you, how does a culture of care look in your school or in your district? We know that we're going to get into listening, so we know listening is a part of it, but what does that even look like for you? What are some of the other things that you're doing with the educators that you support to take care of them and to develop that culture of care? So take a minute, share in the chat some of the ways that you're approaching developing a culture of care. It's great to see everybody too joining from Macon, Yuma, New York City, Courtney from Illinois, and Kristen from Southern California. Thank you all for being here. As everyone's responding, it's awesome to see you all. Suzanne from Little Rock, welcome. Holiday, it's great to see you on. Have a wellness coach and wellness program. That's excellent. And Paulina's just sharing how having informal meetings and responding to emails and phone calls promptly. Just like you would show up for a friend, right, and respond to a friend. It's great to see that. We'll take a few more moments as people are sharing and thinking. All right. So we're going to keep rolling here, and hopefully this gives you, the next couple of sections and slides give you a few more ideas to spark your thinking. When we're thinking about what does it take to build a culture of care, in our research and reading, we found this to be a promising framework to think about it from an article that was featured in EdWeek. And the article is about a culture of care, as you can see. And it proposes that we take an approach where we're listening, investing, and demonstrating. So listen, invest, demonstrate. Then that begs the question, what does it mean to listen, and at what levels are we listening? So that's what we're going to unpack right now. When we're talking about listening and why it's so important, we have to consider all the people that we're supporting, right? And the many ways and levels that can happen through. Recently, I joined a panel about teacher retention and different ways that principals, superintendents, and policymakers and different people and organizations that support educators can help to retain teachers. There are all these different policy suggestions and strategic initiatives, but the principal on the panel, his advice for teacher retention was very straightforward. He was like, listen to the people in your building and make sure that they feel seen and heard. Even if you don't change a ton after that, it helps people to know that someone's looking out for them. And that kind of gets back to, Paulina, something that you're saying in being responsive, letting people know that you're there. Because sometimes an educator just needs to get their voice heard. They just need to get their thoughts out and someone to process with. But we also know that listening can lead to action and adjusting. So it's a little bit of both. When we're thinking about listening, a consideration that we would propose is, at what level are you listening? We can be thinking about listening to data on a national level, or drilling down into what's going on in your school or district, or of course, small group and individual conversations. Why are we proposing these three? On a national level, it's important to be aware of the different broader trends across the country. What are those trends? What are we seeing, right? What does the research say about wellness? Of course, you want to drill down deeper, and you can do that through using district and school surveys, like climate surveys or adult social and emotional learning surveys. That helps you to listen to the needs of your community. From there, you can certainly drill deeper through small group and individual conversations or focus groups, which I'm sure many of you are already doing. It's just creating a line of inquiry so you can better understand what the needs of your teachers are. And the surveys help because they give you specific data points that are going to be usually aligned to a framework. And we have a survey that we'll be sharing a little bit later. The important thing to consider about these different levels of listening are the frequencies that you're doing this with. Whereas national and district, you might be doing that a couple of times a year. At the school, you might be doing that a couple of times a year and then have more frequent pulse surveys. But small group and individual conversations, those kind of interactions should be happening daily and weekly. So on a national level, we know that some of the stressors facing educators are many. We have burnout. A lot of that stems from certainly the pandemic, right? Navigating health concerns. We have people feeling stressed about pay, student behavior issues, right? And also just a public perception of how teachers are feeling and how they think the public feels about them or how parents feel about them, right? The last part is not enough planning or unstructured time for teachers to connect with one another and do the work of planning, right? And designing instruction together. What's interesting to see is how teacher stress compares to that of other adults. So, and symptoms of depression. So in this study, we see that teachers almost double the amount of US adults in other non-education or non-teaching jobs, right? In terms of the level of stress that they feel because of their work. The same is true with depression, right? So we see a disproportionate amount of stress of educators compared to people in other professions. And then finally, we know that teachers are much more likely to leave now than before, right? And so listening to and understanding to why exactly that is, and how are people going to be retiring and when they're going to be retiring and what their timeline looks like is critically important. And disproportionately, right, we see that Black and Hispanic educators are much more likely to leave. So thinking about ways that you can listen, again, we talked about the different levels from national and regional to district and school to more frequent individual and small group conversations, right? From there, what's important to do is accept those findings and respond. Let people know what you heard. Report out on the trends that you saw. It doesn't need to be a new or different thing. You can work that into staff meetings. You can work that into regular weekly emails, right? But making sure, and again, in the spirit of listening, you're validating what people are sharing with you, and you're letting them know that you see what they're sharing. And then finally, from there, you can get into action, right? Taking action and co-designing, which Mika is going to get into more practical and specific ways of what that can look like.
Thank you so much, JDL. And to our friends that are in our comments and in the chats, yes, we see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We wanted to make sure that these tools like Jessica was asking about, or being able to see the big picture and connect it with what we can do now and next, that starts with the listening component and now the investing component. Recruiting teachers is a great opportunity to expand the work. However, if we don't take care of what needs to happen with our present teachers, the new ones will leave too. So we want to look at some of the economics of investing in wellness. This graph really talks about those economics, and the breakdown is simple. There is a cost associated with new hires and recruitment that sometimes feels different than the cost to retain, support, and grow current staff members, and to help them feel psychologically safe and physically safe. So the cost of hiring a new person may include recruitment or interviewing, screening. All of that costs. The onboarding time that it takes, and the tools that we may have to purchase, or the training that needs to happen. And to be honest, there's a learning curve, and folks just need some at bats. So these are all components that, if we think about it, we're investing a lot there. But are we keeping people? Are we growing people? Do they feel safe? Are we investing our time, energy, effort, and finances into making sure that they're happy while they're there? There are some ways that you can invest, and one of them is simple. Review what you're doing already. You may have great things in place, but there may be some blind spots that are there. So, how do you recruit? Are you looking at a diverse population? Are you tapping into pipelines that will extend your efforts? Are you getting feedback along the way in that process? In order to help people grow professionally, are we reserving funds or encouraging individuals to explore their interests in this field, as well as the professional development that we might feel they need? And here's a piece that is kind of overlooked, but reserve time and space to really consume your own content. What type of messaging are you sharing out during these recruitment and retention efforts? How are you communicating with your website, with the look of it, the feel of it, and the content? Along with investing, it's one thing to say we're prioritizing this and this is important and we've been listening, but there is an element of care that has to be demonstrated. And I want to give you actually this tangible idea. I am a Target fan. And yes, Catherine, we'll definitely share slides. I'm a Target fan. And I've heard many tales about people going on Target adventures where they go in for 3 items, come out with a basket full of stuff and empty pockets and purses. So if you fall in prey to Target, you are not alone. But I love that Target has something for everybody. And I want to give you this idea of a Target test. In the comments, I want you to think about someone you love very dearly or very close to, connected, friend, whatever. And imagine that you had $500 to buy them one thing from Target. What would you get them? Think about that. Okay. I automatically thought of my son. So I have a 7 year old or about to be a 7 year old. And I know we are going to the toy department. He doesn't need those things, but that's where I would go. So I see that people are talking about gift cards. Yes, you can do so much with that. Here's what I'm wondering now. If there's someone that you maybe you work with, or maybe it's a person that you haven't talked to in a while. Yes, Lego team, Jessica. If there are is a person that comes to your mind that maybe you have not had the opportunity to connect with, what would you buy them? It's a little bit harder. It's harder to think about that because we haven't demonstrated care in that way. Being able to get something generic feels a lot differently than being able to really care about someone in a space where you can buy something that is made just for them. So when we demonstrate care, that is how we do it. We make connections. On this next slide, when you think about making personal connections, that means you have to ask questions. And it can be very uncomfortable at first. But admitting that vulnerability, including when you've made mistakes and listening, really shows the human side of your leadership. So when you're demonstrating care, think of the target test. And I think we've learned something today that gift cards are always okay. This second tip is really about being reflective in our practices, reviewing structures, trying to understand and be responsive to feedback that we're getting, because our colleagues are telling us that they're unhappy, albeit in their actions, or maybe they're saying it verbally, or maybe you're getting some feedback. So, how do we take that information and review our structures to see if it's something systemic that needs to change?
So thinking about what's systemic and needs to change, and how that intersects with the priorities of your organization, what are some things your organization does to prioritize wellness for staff? So how are you approaching making wellness a priority? What does that look like? All right. Thank you, Jessica. So sharing, right? Like understanding what people need or what could be helpful and sharing that. Thinking
Oh,
about their time as well, right? And reducing that staff meeting time.
Oh man, that's the gift that keeps giving, Jessica. So I think someone mentioned it earlier as well. They've gone to several meetings just this morning. So I appreciate that for sure. And I'm sure your staff does too.
There's also some leadership implications too. So in terms of prioritizing, to what extent is it something that's being talked about and constantly revisited in leadership meetings? Whether that's survey data or what have we learned from connecting with our staff this week as it relates to wellness, and keeping an ongoing pulse on how any investments are paying off. Catherine, very similar to what you're saying, right? With the wellness committee, I appreciate you sharing that, right? And understanding that it needs to be something that is constantly talked about and worked into the conversations that leadership is having. Okay. All right. And then Jessica, again, with moving staff meetings to Zoom. That way you're creating more flexibility for people, right? They can take care of their children. They can do what they need to do, but still be present for important information. All right. Mika, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward here.
Thank you. So there are some considerations that take place at all levels. And in order to really influence and move the work of wellness, there are some considerations at the organizational level that really can take priority. So, how are our current systems and structures inclusive of different perspectives? So, to someone's point about timing and meetings, is our calendar or even our class schedules, do they take into account students who have to ride the bus or have dual credit courses, or even play sports? Sometimes we have to look at how things are scheduled to figure out if this is impacting teacher or educator wellness. Another one is, how are we getting this feedback from people? Are we canvassing the neighborhood or just using email? Are we using Remind 101, or could we even place a QR code in some of the buildings or some of the restaurants and sites in our communities that people frequent? If this is virtual learning, there are ways that this can happen too. But in order for this wellness prioritization to occur, districts and organizations have to be able to think outside of the box when they're addressing different components of salary and what else? Oh, the thought of Clarksville ISD came to mind. They're a small district in Texas, but they've considered 4-day work weeks. So, although some of these ideas are large, there are things that you can move in incremental steps from the organizational lens. This next slide talks about, well, it's actually a glimpse of a tool that we can use. Now, this tool starts from the experience tracking during when we recruit and how we get personnel, and it goes through the life cycle of that employment. We have sub shortages. There are great ways for us to review each step in the life cycle of employment. So, this is a document that we'll share today if you're interested in using it. But the notion of it is making sure that we're getting different perspectives and we're checking these things often. If you want to see improvement, there are metrics of success here, but the critical piece is including this step and including this survey multiple times to see the growth. On the campus level, because there are so many people joining us today, thank you so much. But on the campus level, let's say you don't feel like you can make large decisions in your organization, but you can make decisions on your campus. And things that are in your locus of control include considering diverse forms of data. So, what are teachers interested in? What are students interested in? We can help build and align different programming, activities, structures based on interest so that an educator can come to work and feel included in a sense of and have a sense of community. How do we include or acknowledge their lives outside of the building? I think Justin mentioned this earlier. We have parents that have to teach, and sometimes schools close or their kids may have to stay home. How do we balance that and understand that their lives don't stop just because they enter the building? And finally, we have some classroom considerations here. This is my favorite because it really shows how schools are just microcosms of the world at large. So whether it's teachers, superintendents, bus drivers, it doesn't matter. Though every individual that I just named have opportunities to really be mirrors and windows to what's going on with our students. So, that being said, internal reflection is important. We want wellness to trickle down and be in every single space, including the space of students. So, making sure that they hear their own inner voice as well as have opportunities to dialogue. Sometimes we just have to get things out. Making sure that they are exposed to materials that they can read and explore, where they see multiple perspectives and feel that human condition. And how are we reducing stress for students? How do certain systems or structures that we already have in place, whether it's how we dismiss or how we move students in the hallways, are we adding anxiety or are we alleviating it? This section is the final tip of today, and it's really about how to capitalize on some creative spacing.
So we know that several of you shared some of the things that you're already doing to prioritize the creation of physical or psychologically safe spaces or wellness spaces for staff. Some of you are referring to them. But if there are any other ways that you're thinking about that and what that looks like, be it within a teacher's classroom or the mood and environment you're creating for meetings or a separate space, what does that look like? How are you prioritizing that? Let us know in the chat. We'll just take about 30 seconds to give people to respond before Nico walks us through this last tip.
Earlier, I saw Monica wrote meditation room. I am all over that. So we need to find out where you work, Monica, because that sounds amazing.
All right, Mika, I'm going to move us forward as people are thinking and reflecting. So I'll pass it back to you now.
Thank you so much. Well, to Monica's point, meditation rooms are a thing. I witnessed one myself at Deerwood Academy. No, Scott Elementary. I'm sorry, wrong school. Scott Elementary in Atlanta. And what was amazing about that experience was there were spaces for individuals to just relax. There was a no work in this room rule. And although that can't always happen on campuses, there are ways to still foster that virtually. I noticed that on this next slide, there were shout outs from teachers who felt so appreciated and valued from this. There were spaces where individuals were feeling rejuvenated, but at the same time, this wellness doesn't always have to just be in the physical space. You can't move the bodies, you can move the minds. So one thing that I really liked about this particular slide is there are ways that you can use PD. There are ways that teachers can create this personalized learning network so that they can actually take some psychological space to feel warm and welcomed. They can learn about their interests. They can do it on their own time. They can do it. They can learn or explore outside or in their special spaces or rooms in their homes. Connecting globally is a great way to make sure that we are working to improve how we come to this work.
Mika, I would just add too, I know Jessica had shared this earlier, but when we think about space, it could also be virtual because it introduces flexibility. And so staff meetings from home or letting a few people share it about how they give people half a day off. It can also be, how could you have more flexible time for your teachers? It doesn't need to be every day. Maybe it's only once a month or twice a month, but giving teachers that respite, knowing that they have flexibility, that's when they can take care of their doctor's appointments or run some of the errands that they have to do. It does give them some outlet, right, to be who they need to be and take care of what they need to take care of.
Absolutely. And Jessica's on it today. She even shared about having this kind of sacred time so that people can eat. How often do we forget to eat? You look up, it's 3:30 and you haven't even taken care of your physical needs. So when you're having creative spaces, that can include making sure there's healthy options around for people who may not be able to leave, or making sure that your spaces have warmth, lighting is taken into account. Are people feeling affirmed and seen? How are we celebrating their work in the building and their lives outside of the building? Making sure that they feel as though their whole self can be at work and they don't have to kind of leave some of the stuff at home. They can bring themselves to work and feel fully embraced. I was looking at these creative spaces for adults, and then I wanted to make sure we had time to look at it from the student lens. So in these particular images, we see maker spaces in media specialists or media centers, and we see yoga opportunities in the gym. These young people are doing yoga in the classroom. There is a space for them to explore some information about historical figures. And so all of these things are great for in-person ideas, but then there are some virtual ways that this can work too. Dr. Gholdy Muhammad talks about how to look at 5 considerations so that students can reflect and have some peace of mind, which they can share with their teacher. So, that being said, whether it's identity, skills, intellectualism, criticality, and joy, these questions on this upper left hand portion of the screen, those questions can fit within any curriculum. Sometimes it's out of our hands, but in terms of what curriculum we have to use or we get to use, but these are questions that you can bring to your lens in supporting how wellness is shared from staff to students and other stakeholders.
Mika, I just want to build on what you're sharing here. There's all these wonderful examples of how wellness spaces are being created for students and with the students, right? They can interact. There's different ways that they can break up their day. I want to come back to something that Paulina shared in the chat about having regularly scheduled walks. Yes, teachers, they not all, most of them have some type of planning period, but it might be something that, 9 times out of 10, they have to plan. They have to follow up with parents or do whatever they need to do for their professional responsibilities. But are they having some structured time to pull them away from their desk, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes, to get outside, get off the screen, or get out of their classroom and connect with somebody who cares about them? And so creating that time for recess, if you will, for adults is important too. We do that for children because we understand the benefits and that the children need an outlet and spaces to do that in. We can be doing more of that, just like some of you are sharing for the teachers in our schools as well.
Great call out. Thank you so much, Justin. It made me also want to campaign for adult recess. It has to be a thing. We're moving it forward. It's signed and sealed. So as we kind of have thought about how we can listen, and how we can invest, how we demonstrate care, how we can be creative in our spacing, we wanted to make sure that we provided some time for you guys to ask some questions. So this is I learned this new term. It's probably not even new, just new to me. Ask me anything, AMA. Learn this and wanted you guys to feel safe to do that here. So any questions, you can drop them in the comments and maybe we can give you some practical answers here and some tools after our Q&A.
Yeah, and we certainly will respond. And we also want to open it up for everyone that's present to respond to. There's been some amazing and insightful recommendations in the chat throughout our time together today. So we really want to tap into everybody's experience and wisdom here, and also what you're trying. This is a place where you can be vulnerable and just put out what you're trying. So as people are asking questions, if you're like, yes, we also tried this and it didn't quite work out, but here's what we learned, that would be powerful and helpful for the community too. So we'll pause for a second, see if there's any questions that people want to bring to Mika and I, or if there's anything that you want to pose to the group. We'd love to have you share your question in the chat. I know one asked earlier, and this is going far back into the comments thread, is my teachers need help now. Where do I start? So Mika, I'm wondering if you could take a few moments to think about that and share how you might approach that and what recommendations that you would give, because I know somebody shared that earlier.
Absolutely. There are tangible steps. I know for the work that I've done on my own campuses and the work that I'm doing with EE, the first thing is you need to find out where the hole is or the gap. So I would strongly recommend getting information from the individuals. Goes back to how we talked about demonstrating care. And we have a survey actually that you can use. It's like a check box survey that JDO will show a little bit later. But knowing your demographic, knowing what their needs are will help you to be responsive. Other than that, you'll just be kind of taking a guess. So to kind of get a better bullseye, capturing those thoughts, that would be where I started. I would also do some reflecting on different components of where you find the gaps. Is the gap in people are feeling overwhelmed because they don't have support because coworkers are out sick or there are some vacancies? Okay, so maybe we need to look at our recruitment and perhaps we can start there. So hopefully when you see this tool at the end of this call, that might help you figure out this is where I need to begin. But that's a common question. Where do I start now?
I think so. Another one, and this kind of, I think, Jessica, perhaps this will get at your comment and Lolade, what you're sharing. How do you encourage participation? Something that we've tried to do at Education Elements is developing a habit. So we do that through 30-day challenges. And what that looks like is essentially putting out there, let's say, for example, I believe, Paulina, you talked about the 10-minute walks. Even if that's where you're starting, right? You're starting with 10-minute walks. Not everyone's going to be able to join. Maybe you have a couple of shifts, and that's perhaps why, Paulina, you have a couple of 10-minute walks throughout the day. If that's the focus, just to get people, yes, walking and moving, but also to connect with one another, right? So that's one thing that you can consider doing is, can we have a 30-day challenge to drive participation in one wellness activity, right? Just something very simple and straightforward that's very predictable and consistent. And you might not get everybody participating, but you could get a core group. Something simple that you could do as a part of that also is just understanding and having people reflect on how they're feeling before the challenge begins, at the midpoint, and after. It could just be standing in a circle before and after the walk. It doesn't need to be something lengthy, right, or cumbersome. If you don't want to add another survey, we certainly understand that. Mika, just one more thing I would share, and this is more directed at Jessica's comment, which I think probably many other people are feeling, is in the same way that with students, right, we create small groups. We're reflecting on students, hopefully as teams of teachers and leaders, and we're prioritizing very small groups of students that we are making sure that we're supporting and providing extra love and care and attention for, and checking in with them with a lot more frequency. Some of us are probably already doing that, but doing that, right, and co-building with them a simple plan to address a specific problem, right? If that's people aren't able to care for themselves, right, or they don't have any time to get planning done, or whatever the specific thing is, I think first understanding who are those specific people, right, that really need that high touch support, and then what is the specific problem or challenge that you're helping them with, right? And focusing on and narrowing your focus to a few rather than many, because you also have to be looking out for yourself and taking care of yourself and not spreading yourself too thin.
I appreciate you saying take care of yourself, because that is kind of something that, when I think about the wellness activities that people are trying to really leverage, when you take care of yourself, you can invite others to take care of themselves. So to the person that asked this earlier, inviting somebody on that walk. Sometimes we'll send out this mass email. We may even publicize it on speakers or announcements, but it feels a lot differently if I said, hey, Justin, would you join me today? We're going to walk. They do it a bunch of times during the week, but I want you to join me. It makes a difference. And when you demonstrate that care, your numbers will grow, because now it's a personal invitation. It is easy to ignore certain emails. It's a lot more difficult to tell someone no when they have this face and glow about them that is saying, hey, I want you to join me so that we can get better. So that will be one tip. I love that Jessica also brought out about survey fatigue. Trust me, I get it. So the question that you can ask for teachers, for educators, for loved ones, whomever, if they're having a meltdown or a moment, my favorite question is, what do you need right now? Taking that moment causes them to feel safe. Having that question ready, their response might be, I just need a minute. Okay, go take your minute. Can you come back in this amount of time, or what time will you be back? I can watch your class, or we can figure something out. Getting to the root of what they need before prescribing what we want to do to fix it is really the crux of how to prioritize wellness. Everybody's wellness needs differ. So that seems like a very small thing to do, but it really moves mountains, especially when you don't want to complete another survey or don't have the capacity to do that. Asking what do you need in this moment helps them to prioritize how their needs can be met.
And just, Pauline, I appreciate your reflection, right? Is just leaning into promoting wellness and care. Definitely some teachers respond to, and people respond well to a newsletter, right, with tips to share and things that they can do. some people need to be invited in, Mika, like what you're saying. Something to consider as well is that it doesn't need to be it being introducing a new habit, right, or a routine to support wellness. It can be integrated into something that you're already doing. So for example, let's say you are an English department chair or you're a principal. Why not start the first 10 minutes of your staff meeting by taking a walk around the building or in the hallway, right? Or just writing simple gratitude notes and being like, okay, go give this to another teacher in the school. Many of you are already doing some of those things. So I'm really saying two things here. One is integrating it into some of the current space and time that you already have dedicated to team meetings or any staff time together, right? And the second thing is elevating and just recognizing what you're already doing, right? And making sure that people understand why you're doing those things. Because chances are pretty good that you're already doing some of the practices that your colleagues have shared in the chat. And it's just a matter of integrating them into the way you think about how you're approaching and supporting teacher wellness in your school.
One of the questions that came out is when Emily asks, do you have suggestions for getting parents or other people involved? I have a 6-year-old, almost 7. I think I called him 7 earlier. He acts like he's 17. But one thing that his school has done is they just ask us, what do you guys need at home? What can we do to extend this? So I thought that was simple, but it was helpful. But then it made me ask them, what can I do to support you at school? Now, not everybody has the time or capabilities to do that, but being able to practice and then ask students to do this with their parents goes a long way. A specific example would be when I was about 8 or 9, we had this big recycling push. My mother was not a person that recycled, but I remember my teacher saying, hey, you can do this at home. You want to recycle, reduce, reuse. That's all she kept saying. So I started saying that at home, and it made my mom start having a different approach. We got a recycle bin. That was unheard of back then from where I lived, but that small act of these are things that we're doing to reflect at school, to prioritize wellness. Mommy, did you drink water today? I get these questions from this little person who is obviously getting equipped at home. So if I'm thinking about how to get people on board, I have to model it, do it, and then ask them to extend it or share it. There was a question that kind of came up or came top of mind to me, and it was, I don't make the decisions. So how can I take what I know is important? That's why I'm here on this live stream. And how can I make this a priority for other people? And I wanted to share that just never underestimate your power as an influencer. We see people on TikTok and YouTube, they have taught us that. Just the idea of sharing out these practices, evangelizing it, making sure that you're promoting it within your locus of control is contagious. And so, whether you use social media or maybe you can really encourage people that are prioritizing their own wellness, take pictures of that, share that message, make sure that people feel left out of this VIP service of taking care of themselves. So that was just something I wanted to share because I think it really goes along with Jessica's comment about writing letters of encouragement. That's just another way to get your message out there. Seems like we have pretty much answered as many questions that have been shared, but the learning doesn't stop here. If you come up with some and you have something that you want to share, we will make sure to have our emails and those slides. You can always reach out to us. But I just want to thank everybody for sharing their ideas, for being vulnerable, for taking this time out of a very busy day. So absolutely thank you. We have a couple of tools to kind of share that maybe you can use to get started. And we will continue to keep this bank of ideas. So thanks again.
Yep, we appreciate your time, and we certainly appreciate the ideas that you've been sharing. Hopefully you learned as much from us, if not, and as from your colleagues. So many wonderful ideas have been shared, very practical pieces of information too, in practical ways that you can improve wellness with your teachers, with your families and parents, and with your students as well. So we're grateful for the opportunity to connect with each of you, and for just sharing, again, your energy in the comments and in the chat, rather, to enrich the community, and so others can benefit from it. And Mika, as you said, the learning does for sure continue. So we are hoping that you take at least one of these ideas from us or from one of your colleagues and put them into practice, no matter how large or small that is. Okay.